My son let me sell my prized 1969 Mustang from a hospital bed because he said $50,000 was too much to save my life. 6 months later, he slammed a business plan on my kitchen table asking for $500,000. When I said no, he didn't just get angry. He tried to have me committed. If you think family always comes first, wait until you hear what money does to blood. Before I tell you how I lost a son but regained my life, hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against the people you raised. It was 7 in the morning on a Sunday in Chicago. The kind of winter morning where the wind off Lake Michigan rattles the window panes and the cold seeps into your bones, no matter how high you crank the thermostat. I was sitting at my small kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee and enjoying the silence. I am Thomas Caldwell, 74 years old, and silence is something I have learned to cherish since I retired. Then the front door exploded inward. There was no doorbell, no knock, just the violent sound of a key turning aggressively in the lock and the heavy oak door slamming against the wall. My heart skipped a beat, a dangerous thing for a man with my medical history. I thought it was a home invasion. I was half out of my chair reaching for the landline when I saw them. It was Brandon, my 32-year-old son, and his wife, Tiffany. They stormed into the hallway, shaking off snow, bringing a gust of freezing air and chaotic energy into my sanctuary. They didn't say hello. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't even take off their boots, tracking slush across the hardwood floors I had just polished yesterday. Brandon marched right up to the table. He looked manic. His eyes were wide, his face flushed not from the cold, but from adrenaline. He was carrying a thick, glossy binder. He raised it high and slammed it down onto the table so hard, my coffee cup jumped and spilled dark liquid onto the placemat. "Dad." "We need to talk," Brandon said, his voice breathless. "You need to sign this check. Today." I looked at the binder. Embossed in gold letters on the front cover were the words, "The Velvet Spoon." Below it a subtitle read, "Luxury Dining Experience." I looked up at him, wiping the spilled coffee with a napkin. "Good morning to you too, Brandon. Nice to see you, Tiffany. Want some coffee?" "We don't have time for coffee," Tiffany snapped. She was pacing the kitchen, tapping her long manicured fingernails on her phone screen. "We are on a deadline. This is a limited time offer. The landlord needs a deposit by next Friday or we lose the location." Brandon pulled a chair out and sat down, leaning in close. His breath smelled of mints and desperation. "Look, Dad. This is it. The Velvet Spoon. It is a franchise opportunity. High-end. Exclusive. We found the perfect spot downtown. We just need the capital to secure the rights and the lease." I stared at him. "And how much capital is that? $500,000, Brandon said. The number hung in the air like a lead balloon. $500,000, I repeated calmly. Tiffany stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. She looked at me with that condescending look she reserves for waiters and her own father-in-law. "Don't act shocked, Tom. We know you have it. You sold your supply chain company 5 years ago. You have been sitting on that money, letting it rot in low-yield bonds or whatever ancient things you invest in. What are you saving it for? You are 74. You can't take it with you." Brandon nodded vigorously. "Exactly. This is for the family, Dad. This is for Noah, your grandson. Do you want Noah to grow up average, or do you want him to be the heir to a restaurant empire? This is your chance to finally be a useful grandfather, to leave a real legacy instead of just hoarding cash." I looked at the binder. I looked at the glossy photos of velvet chairs and gold-plated cutlery, but I wasn't really seeing them. My hand drifted up almost instinctively to touch the center of my chest, right over my sternum. Under my flannel shirt, there was a scar. It was pink, jagged, and still sensitive to the touch. My mind wasn't in the kitchen anymore. It was pulled back 6 months, to the sterile, beeping hell of the Mount Sinai intensive care unit. I remembered the crushing weight on my chest, The diagnosis had been severe aortic stenosis. My heart valve was calcified, barely opening. I was suffocating from the inside out. Dr. Evans, a good man with tired eyes, had stood by my bedside and given me the options. "Mr. Caldwell," he had said, "because of your age and previous respiratory issues, open heart surgery is extremely high risk. There is a 40% chance you won't make it off the table." I remember gripping the bed sheets. "What is the alternative, TAVR?" he said. "Transcatheter aortic valve replacement. We go in through the leg. It is minimally invasive. Recovery is days, not months. It will save your life." "Let's do that," I had whispered. "That is where it gets complicated," Dr. Evans said, looking down at his clipboard. "Medicare Part B covers the standard procedure, but the specific valve device you need, the one compatible with your anatomy, and the specialist required to deploy it, falls into a coverage gap. We need a $50,000 copay to secure the device and book the theater. It is an out-of-pocket expense. $50,000. My liquid cash was tied up in a real estate trust that took 30 days to access. I didn't have 30 days. I had maybe 3. I remember calling Brandon from that hospital bed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I explained the situation. I asked him to wire me the $50,000 from the joint emergency account I had set up for him years ago, or to lend it to me until my funds cleared. I will never forget his voice. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't worried. It was annoyed. "Dad, 50,000. Are you serious? That is the money we set aside for the Tesla. Tiffany has her heart set on the Model X, but Brandon." I wheezed. "It is my heart. I could die." "You are being dramatic," he sighed. "Just do the regular surgery. Medicare covers that. You are 74, Dad. You have had a good run. Spending 50 grand on a fancy valve seems excessive. We don't have the liquidity right now." He hung up. I lay there in the ICU listening to the monitor beep, realizing my son had just calculated the value of my life and decided it was worth less than a car. I didn't die, obviously. I called a used car dealership from my bed. I sold my 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. I had that car for 30 years. It was my pride, my joy, the one thing I bought for myself after decades of work. I sold it for a fraction of its value to a guy who came to the hospital parking lot with a cashier's check. I signed the title with an IV in my arm, crying not for the car, but for the reason I had to sell it. The memory faded, and I was back in my kitchen. The coffee stain was soaking into the tablecloth. Brandon was tapping the velvet spoon binder, grinning like a shark. "So, Dad," Brandon said, "we need the check today to start the paperwork. 500 grand. It is an investment." I pushed the binder back across the table toward him. It slid across the wood and stopped at the edge. "No," I said. Brandon blinked. "What do you mean, no? You haven't even read the projection numbers." "I don't need to read the numbers," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against the new valve. 6 months ago, I asked you for $50,000. Not for a business, not for a luxury, for my life. You told me it was too much. You told me to take the cheap option and risk dying because you wanted a Tesla." Brandon turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He slammed his hand on the table. "Oh my God, are you still harping on that? You are remembering it wrong, Dad. You were on medication. You were confused." "I never said that. You said exactly that," I replied. Tiffany stepped in, her voice shrill. "We were protecting our financial stability. Tom, we couldn't just throw money away on every medical whim." "But this is different. This is a business. This generates return. You are being petty. You are punishing your son because of some senile hallucination you had in the hospital." I stood up. "I am not senile, Tiffany, and I am not investing. My answer is no. Get out of my house." Brandon stood up too, knocking his chair over. You are a selfish old man. You want to hoard your millions while we struggle, fine. But actions have consequences, Dad. Tiffany grabbed her purse, her face twisted in a sneer. Come on, Brandon, let's go. And you know what, Tom? Since you are so toxic, since you are so obsessed with the past, you can forget about seeing Noah. My blood ran cold. Noah was 5. He was the only bright spot in my life. What did you say? I asked. You heard me, Tiffany spat. You are a toxic influence. We are cutting you off. You won't see your grandson. You won't speak to him. You can rot in this big empty house with your money. They stormed out. The door slammed again, shaking the house. I stood there in the silence, the echo of their threat ringing in my ears. They thought they could blackmail me with my grandson. They thought I was a weak, lonely old man who would cave to emotional terrorism. I walked to the window and watched them get into their leased Range Rover. I wasn't sad. I wasn't crying. I felt something else entirely. A cold, hard clarity. I picked up my phone. I didn't call them back. I dialed a number I hadn't used in a year. Leo, I said when my lawyer answered. It is Tom. I need you to hire a private investigator. I want to know why my son needs $500,000 so badly that he is willing to threaten me with my own grandson. I don't think it is for a restaurant. I smell debt, deep debt. Find out everything. And that was how the war began. The silence in my kitchen after they left was heavy, but it was not nearly as suffocating as the air in the Mount Sinai ICU 6 months ago. My hand was still pressing against my chest, feeling the ridge of the scar through my shirt. That physical mark was the only thing anchoring me to reality, because my mind was drifting back to the sterile white hell where I almost died. I closed my eyes, and I was back there. The rhythmic beeping of the EKG monitor was the only music in the room. I remember the smell of antiseptic and the taste of metallic fear in the back of my throat. My chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it. Every breath was a battle. I was alone. No family photos on the bedside table, just a plastic pitcher of lukewarm water and a stack of medical forms that looked like a death warrant. Dr. Evans had walked in with a clipboard and a look I had seen before. It was the look of a man who had bad news and no good way to deliver it. He pulled up a chair and sat close to the bed, his voice low and professional. Tom, we have reviewed your latest echo, he said. The stenosis is critical. The valve is calcified to the point where your heart is working 3 times as hard just to keep you alive. We cannot wait anymore. I nodded, the oxygen mask chafing my face. So cut me open, Doc. Fix it. That is the issue, Evans sighed, rubbing his temples. You are 74. You have a history of respiratory issues from your time in the warehouse. Your lungs are not what they used to be. If we do a traditional open-heart surgery, cracking the sternum, putting you on a bypass machine, the trauma to your body would be massive. The recovery would be months if you survived the table. The mortality rate for a man with your profile in open heart is nearly 40%. 40%. A coin toss, basically. There is another way, Evans continued. It is called TAAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. We go in through the femoral artery in your leg. We guide a new valve up to your heart and deploy it inside the old one. No chest cracking. No bypass machine. You could be home in 3 days. It turns a massive trauma into a manageable procedure. I felt a surge of hope. That sounds perfect. Let's do that. Evans hesitated. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. Here is the reality of the American medical system, Tom. Medicare Part B covers the procedure itself, but the specific high-performance valve device required for your anatomy, plus the specialized team needed to deploy it on short notice, creates a coverage gap. Because your condition is considered manageable by cheaper means in the eyes of the insurance adjusters, they denied the full claim for the TAVR device. They will pay for the open-heart surgery because it is cheaper for them, even if it kills you. I stared at him, trying to process the bureaucracy of my own survival. So what does that mean? It means to get the TAVR, to get the surgery that gives you a 95% chance of survival instead of 60. We need an upfront copay for the device and the specialist fees. It is out of pocket. How much? I asked, my voice rasping. $50,000, Evans said softly. And we need it within 48 hours to secure the device and the theater. Otherwise, we have to schedule the open heart procedure for Monday. $50,000. I had money. I had a significant portfolio from selling my business. But it was all tied up in long-term trusts and real estate investments. Accessing it required lawyers' signatures and a 30-day clearing period. I didn't have 30 days. I had 48 hours. I lay there, the panic rising in my chest faster than the pain. I needed cash, liquid cash. Then I thought of Brandon. I had set up a joint emergency account with him years ago. It was my money, but his name was on it for exactly this kind of situation. I had also given him generous cash gifts over the years. I knew he had liquidity, or at least I thought he did. I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My fingers were numb as I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. He sounded annoyed, like I had interrupted something important. "Hey, Dad, what is it? I am at the dealership." "Brandon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am in the hospital. It is my heart." "Oh, again," he sighed. "You really need to watch your sodium, Dad. It is not the sodium, son. I need surgery. There is a complication with the insurance. I need $50,000 wired to the hospital billing department. Today. Or they have to cut my chest open, and I might not make it." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, cold silence. I could hear background music, maybe a showroom floor. "50 grand, Brandon finally said. "Dad, that is a lot of money. It is for the valve, Brandon. It is the difference between living and dying. Please, you can access the emergency fund or lend it to me until my trust clears next month. Dad, the emergency fund is gone. We used it for the down payment on the house in the suburbs. And as for our personal savings, well, we are literally at the Tesla dealership right now. Tiffany has her heart set on the Model X. We are signing the papers in 10 minutes. I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You are buying a car." "It is not just a car, Dad. It is an investment in our image. Look, just do the regular surgery. Medicare covers that, right? Why do you always need the premium option? You are 74 years old. You have had a good life. Spending $50,000 on a fancy valve just seems selfish when we have a young family to build." Selfish. The word hung in the air. "Brandon," I whispered, "if I do the open heart, there is a 40% chance I die." "Well, we all have to go sometime, Dad. Sickness and death are just numbers." "Don't be dramatic. I can't send you the money. We need this car. Good luck with the surgery. Let us know how it goes." The line went dead. I dropped the phone onto the sheets. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little dots until they blurred together. My son had just weighed my life against an electric SUV and decided the car was more valuable. He was gambling with my life because he figured I was old inventory, ready to be written off. I didn't call him back. I didn't beg. A cold resolve settled over me, replacing the panic. I was not going to die because of his greed. I picked up the phone again. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was a classic car dealership in the city run by an old acquaintance named Miller. "Miller it is, Tom Caldwell." "Tom. Good to hear from you. How is that Boss 429 running?" "It is perfect, Miller. And it is for sale." There was a pause. "You are selling the Mustang, Tom, that is your baby. You spent 10 years restoring that car. I need $50,000 in a cashier's check brought to Mount Sinai Hospital within the hour." Tom. That car is worth 80, maybe 90 grand in this market. 50 is a steal. I know it is a steal, I snapped, feeling tears prick my eyes for the first time. I don't have time to negotiate. Do you want the car or not? I will be there in 45 minutes. I signed the title over from my hospital bed. My hand shook as I put the pen to the paper. That car was my freedom. It was the symbol of my youth, my hard work, the one thing I kept just for me. Watching Miller walk out of the room with the keys was like watching a piece of my soul leave. But 45 minutes later, the hospital administrator came in with a receipt. The TAVR device was secured. I survived the surgery. I spent 3 days recovering alone. Brandon never called. Tiffany never visited. When I got home, I walked into my empty garage and looked at the oil spot on the concrete where my Mustang used to sit. That empty space was a constant reminder of exactly how much my life was worth to my family. Back in the present, I opened my eyes. The kitchen was cold. The memory of that betrayal was a physical weight heavier than the scar tissue on my chest. Brandon stood in front of me now, asking for $500,000. He had forgotten. Or worse, he had rewritten history in his head to make himself the victim. He truly believed he had done nothing wrong. But I remembered. I remembered every word. I remembered the dial tone. I remembered the empty garage. I looked at the door they had just slammed. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by something stronger, something unbreakable. They thought they were dealing with a lonely, desperate old man who would pay anything for a scrap of affection. They were wrong. They were dealing with a survivor. And survivors don't pay ransom. They fight back. I picked up my phone and dialed Leo. It was time to find out exactly what kind of hole my son had dug for himself, because nobody asks for $500,000 at 7 in the morning for a restaurant, unless the devil is already knocking at their door. I placed my hand flat on the glossy cover of the Velvet Spoon business plan. It was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the heat rising in the room. Brandon was leaning forward, his eyes wide with an expectation that bordered on madness. He truly believed that after everything, after the hospital, after the silence, I would simply open my checkbook because he demanded it. He thought his need for $500,000 erased my need for survival 6 months ago. I closed the binder. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the rest of the pages was soft, but in the quiet kitchen it sounded like a gavel coming down. The answer is no, I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. I was surprised by my own steadiness. No, Brandon. Not 1 cent. Not now, not ever. For a second, the room was absolutely still. The refrigerator hummed. The wind rattled the window pane. Then Brandon's face transformed. The hopeful, desperate salesman mask cracked and fell away, revealing something ugly and childish underneath. He turned a shade of red that started at his neck and consumed his face. "You are joking," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You have the money. We know you have the money sitting in that trust fund. You are just being spiteful because of the car. You are choosing to ruin my life over a used Mustang." I stood up slowly, keeping the table between us. I am choosing to protect what is left of my life from people who do not value it. You made your choice in the ICU, son. Now I am making mine. Brandon let out a sound that was half scream, half growl. He grabbed the ceramic coffee mug I had been drinking from, the one with the faded "World's Best Dad" slogan I had gotten 20 years ago, and hurled it. It didn't hit me, but it wasn't aimed at the wall. He threw it straight down. The mug shattered against the hardwood floor with a violent crash, sending shards of ceramic and dregs of cold coffee exploding outward. A jagged piece skittered across the floor and stopped against the toe of my slipper. Tiffany didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just watched the destruction with a cold, detached clinical interest, as if she were evaluating whether the outburst would help or hurt their negotiation position. You are a selfish old man, Brandon shouted, spit flying from his lips. You are sitting on a pile of gold like a dragon while your family starves. I need this, Dad. You don't understand. I need this to work. I looked at the broken mug, then back at him. I understand perfectly, Brandon. You need money. But you are looking for a savior, and I resigned from that position on the day I sold my car to save my own heart. That was when Tiffany stepped forward. She placed a hand on Brandon's heaving shoulder, not to comfort him, but to silence him. She realized brute force wasn't working. It was time for the nuclear option. She walked around the mess on the floor and stood directly in front of me. She smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement. Okay, Tom, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. If that is how you want to play it. If you want to talk about choices, let's talk about consequences. She pulled out her iPhone and tapped the screen a few times, then turned it around to face me. It was a picture of Noah, my 5-year-old grandson. He was grinning, missing a front tooth, holding a pumpkin we had carved together last Halloween. It was the last time I had seen him before the surgery. Take a good look, Tiffany said, because this is the last time you are going to see him. I felt a cold hand squeeze my stomach. You can't do that, I said. He is my grandson. I can and I will, she replied, her eyes narrowing. You are a source of toxic energy, Tom. You are negative, you are vindictive, and you are emotionally unstable. We cannot have that around Noah. We are protecting him from your bitterness. She slid the phone back into her designer bag. From this moment on, you are dead to us. You don't call. You don't visit. If you show up at his school, I will get a restraining order. If you send gifts, I will throw them in the trash. You want to keep your money? Fine. Keep it. It will be the only company you have when you die in this big, empty house. Brandon was breathing hard, staring at the floor, but he didn't object. He didn't defend me. He stood there and let his wife use his son as a weapon to hurt his father. Get out, I whispered. They didn't need to be told twice. Tiffany grabbed Brandon's arm and pulled him toward the hallway. They marched out, their boots stomping on the floorboards. The front door opened and slammed shut with a force that shook the pictures on the walls. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence rushed back in, but now it felt heavy, oppressive. I looked down at the shards of the world's best dad mug. The irony wasn't lost on me. I knelt down, my knees popping, and began to pick up the pieces by hand. The sharp edges bit into my skin, but I didn't feel it. Toxic energy. That is what she had called me, because I refused to be bled dry. I threw the ceramic pieces into the trash and washed my hands. The house felt suddenly enormous. It felt like a tomb. I walked into the living room and sat in my armchair, staring at the blank television screen. Noah. I needed to hear his voice, just to make sure he was okay, just to tell him Grandpa loved him regardless of what his parents said. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were trembling again, just like in the hospital. I pulled up Brandon's contact. I typed a message. Please don't do this. Let's leave Noah out of it. I hit send. The message bubble appeared. It sat there for a second, blue. Then it turned green. Not delivered. I frowned and tried calling. It didn't even ring. It went straight to a generic automated recording. The customer you are trying to reach is not available. Blocked. I tried Tiffany. Same result. Straight to voicemail. My heart rate was climbing. I could see the numbers on my smartwatch ticking up. I needed to calm down, but panic was setting in. They had actually done it. They had cut the cord. I opened the FaceTime app. Maybe they hadn't blocked me there yet. I tapped on Noah's iPad account. We used to FaceTime every Sunday evening to read stories. Calling Noah, it rang, and rang, and rang. Then the screen went black. User busy. They had declined the call. I tried again. Connection failed. blocked there too. I put the phone down on the side table. The finality of it washed over me. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a siege. They were cutting off my supply of oxygen until I paid the ransom. They knew Noah was the only leverage they had, and they were using him with brutal efficiency. I looked around the room. Photos of Noah were everywhere. Noah on the swing set I built. Noah at the zoo. Noah on my shoulders. I realized then that they weren't just angry. They were desperate. People don't burn bridges this valuable unless they are running from a fire. You don't cut off a wealthy father who has supported you for years unless you have no other choice. Why did they need $500,000 by Friday, not next month? Next Friday. Why did Brandon look so manic? Why did Tiffany look so terrified beneath her anger? The isolation pressed in on me. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I could sit here and rot just like Tiffany said. I could let the silence swallow me whole. I could write the check just to hear my grandson's voice again. But that would be paying the kidnappers. And if you pay once, you pay forever. I stood up. I walked to my desk in the study and pulled out a fresh notepad. I wrote down 2 names, Brandon, Tiffany. Then I wrote down the number, $500,000. And finally, I wrote the question that would save me. Why I wasn't going to call them back. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to find out what monster was chasing my children so closely that they were willing to throw me to the wolves to escape it. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Leo Katz, my attorney and oldest friend. It was Sunday, but Leo would answer. He always answered. Leo, I said when he picked up, don't ask me how I am. I need you to do something for me. I need you to hire a forensic accountant and a private investigator. Tom, Leo's voice was rough with sleep. What is going on? My son just declared war, I said, looking at the picture of Noah on my desk. And I need to know exactly how much ammunition he has before I fire back. I want you to look into their finances. Everything. Credit cards, loans, gambling debts. I want to know why they need $500,000 by Friday. There was a pause on the line. You think they are in trouble? I think they are drowning, Leo. And they just tried to use me as a life raft. Find out everything. I hung up the phone. The isolation was still there, but now it had a purpose. They wanted me to be a lonely old man. Instead, I was going to be a detective. The siege had begun, but they had forgotten that I was the one who built the fortress. The silence in my house became unbearable by Monday afternoon. I had spent 24 hours staring at the phone waiting for an apology that I knew would never come. Every time I looked at the clock, I knew exactly what Noah was doing. At 8, he was eating oatmeal. At noon, he was napping. And at 3:30, the bell would ring at Willow Creek Preschool, and the parents would line up by the chain-link fence to collect their children. I couldn't stay away. I knew Tiffany had said I was cut off, but I deluded myself into thinking it was just angry rhetoric. Surely if I just showed up, if I stood there with a smile and maybe a small toy, they wouldn't cause a scene in public. They wouldn't deny a grandfather a hug. I grabbed my keys and drove to the school, my heart fluttering with a mix of hope and anxiety. The playground was full of noise, the chaotic symphony of 5-year-olds released from captivity. I parked my car and walked toward the gate, scanning the sea of colorful jackets for Noah's bright red parka. I spotted him near the slide, laughing with a friend. My chest tightened with love. He was innocent in all of this. He didn't know his parents were trying to sell his grandfather's dignity. I approached the gate where Mrs. Higgins, the head teacher, stood with her clipboard. She was a woman I had chatted with 100 times about the weather, about Noah's reading progress, about the Bears game. She usually greeted me with a warm smile. Today she didn't smile. As I got closer, her eyes widened, and she took a half step back, effectively blocking the entrance. She looked over my shoulder as if checking to see if I was alone, and then clutched her clipboard tightly against her chest. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice tight, please don't come any closer. I stopped, confused. Hello, Mrs. Higgins. I am just here to pick up Noah. I know it is usually Brandon's day, but I thought I would surprise him." Mrs. Higgins looked pained. She glanced around at the other parents, some of whom were now watching us with curiosity. She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "Mr. Caldwell, you cannot pick up Noah. You have been removed from the authorization list." I felt a cold flush rise up my neck. Removed? What do you mean removed? I have been picking him up every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years. "I know," she said, and I could see genuine pity in her eyes, which was almost worse than the rejection. "But Brandon and Tiffany came in first thing this morning. They were very specific. They updated the custodial protocol. You are strictly forbidden from having contact with the child." "This is ridiculous," I stammered, my hands starting to shake. "We had a disagreement about business. That is all. You know me, Mrs. Higgins. You know I am safe." Mrs. Higgins bit her lip. She looked down at her clipboard, then back at me, her expression shifting from pity to professional caution. "Mr. Caldwell, they didn't just remove your name. They filed an incident report with the school administration. They told us—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "They told us that you have been exhibiting signs of aggression and cognitive decline." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cognitive decline. "They said I have dementia." I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of children screaming in the distance. "They said you were becoming confused and unpredictable," Mrs. Higgins said gently. "They mentioned an incident yesterday where you became violent and threw objects. They said it is not safe for Noah to be alone with you until you are medically evaluated. If you don't leave the property, Mr. Caldwell, I am instructed to call the police. Please, don't make me do that in front of Noah." I looked past her. Noah was at the fence now, his fingers curled around the metal links. He saw me. He waved a big, enthusiastic wave. "Hi, Grandpa," he shouted. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed the new valve Dr. Evans had installed. My son hadn't just banned me. He was building a case. Cognitive decline, aggression, unpredictable behavior. Those weren't just insults. Those were legal terms. That was the language you used when you were preparing to file for a conservatorship. If they could prove I was senile, if they could get enough witnesses to say I was losing my mind, they wouldn't need me to sign a check. They could just take control of my assets legally. They were destroying my reputation to steal my money. I waved back to Noah, forcing a smile that felt like it was breaking my face. I couldn't let him see me cry. I couldn't let him see the police escorting his grandfather away. "Bye, buddy," I called out, my voice cracking. "Be good." I turned around and walked back to my car. I could feel the eyes of the other parents burning into my back. I could hear their whispers. "That is the grandfather. Poor thing. Losing his mind. So sad." I got into my car and locked the doors. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive straight to Brandon's house and tear it apart brick by brick. But that would only prove them right. That would be the aggression they were banking on. I didn't go home. I couldn't go back to that empty house with the ghost of the family I thought I had. I needed a fortress, but not one made of bricks. I needed one made of law. I drove downtown, navigating the Chicago traffic with a cold, mechanical precision. I pulled up to a brownstone building in the Loop, the office of Leo Katz. Leo had been my lawyer and friend for 40 years. He was the only person left in the world who knew where all the bodies were buried. I stormed past his receptionist, ignoring her startled greeting, and walked straight into his office. Leo was behind his mahogany desk reviewing a contract. He looked up, saw the look on my face, and immediately took off his reading glasses. "Tom," he said, "you look like you just went 12 rounds with a heavyweight. Sit down." I didn't sit. I paced the room, the energy of the betrayal vibrating under my skin. They told the school I have dementia, Leo. They told Noah's teacher I am violent and confused. They banned me from the premises. Leo's face darkened. He pulled a legal pad toward him. Who did Brandon and Tiffany? Yesterday I refused to give them $500,000 for a restaurant. Today they are painting me as senile. They are setting up a competency challenge, Leo. I know it. They want to take power of attorney. Leo scribbled furiously. That is a bold move, and a dangerous one. If they can't prove it, it is defamation. They don't need to prove it in court to ruin my life, I said. They just need to create enough doubt to freeze my assets or get emergency custody. But that is not why I am here. I stopped pacing and leaned on his desk, looking him in the eye. I need you to use your brain, Leo. You have been doing this a long time. You know how business works. I like to think so, Leo said. Brandon came to me at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, demanding $500,000. He said it was for a franchise fee and a lease deposit for a restaurant called the Velvet Spoon. He said it was a limited-time offer, and he needed the money by this Friday. Leo frowned. A franchise fee, usually those negotiations take months. You don't just walk in with a check on a Friday and get the keys. Exactly, I said. And you don't demand $500,000 with a 5-day deadline for a business opportunity unless the opportunity is actually a threat. What are you thinking? Leo asked. I think there is no restaurant, I said. Or if there is, it is just a cover. I think my son is in trouble. Deep trouble. You don't threaten to destroy your father's reputation over a business deal. You do it because you are terrified of what happens if you don't get the money. I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper where I had written the numbers. $500,000. By Friday. That is not a business plan, Leo. That is a ransom note. Leo tapped his pen on the desk. You want me to find out who is holding the gun? I want you to hire the best forensic accountant in the city, I said, and a private investigator who isn't afraid to dig through trash. I want to know everything. I want to see Brandon's bank accounts. I want to see Tiffany's credit card statements. I want to know who they talk to, where they go, and who they owe. It will cost you, Leo warned. Expedited investigations aren't cheap. It won't cost as much as losing my grandson, I replied. Leo nodded. He picked up his phone. I will make the call. We will have a preliminary report in 48 hours. I finally sat down in the leather chair opposite him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted and aching. I felt every year of my age. Tom, Leo said gently, waiting for the line to connect. If we find out they are just greedy, what then? I will be disappointed, I said. And if we find out they are in real trouble, if this is gambling or drugs or loan sharks, I looked at the window watching the gray Chicago sky. Then I will know exactly what I am fighting, I said. My son tried to bury me today, Leo. He tried to erase me. If he is drowning, I need to know how deep the water is before I decide if I am going to throw him a rope or let him sink. Leo started talking to the investigator on the phone. I closed my eyes and listened. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the client. And for the first time in 24 hours, I didn't feel helpless. I felt dangerous. They wanted to play games with my life. Fine. But they forgot that I was the one who taught them the rules, and now I was going to rewrite them. 48 hours is a long time to wait when you know the axe is falling, but you don't know where it will land. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday in a state of suspended animation. I didn't leave the house. I didn't answer the phone, though it rang incessantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably flying monkeys, sent by Tiffany to harass me. I just sat in my study staring at the photo of Noah waiting for Leo to call. When the call finally came on Thursday morning, Leo didn't waste time with pleasantries. He just said, "Come to the office, Tom, and bring your reading glasses because you are not going to believe this." I drove downtown with a knot in my stomach that felt tighter than the day I went in for surgery. The sky over Chicago was a bruised purple threatening snow, matching my mood perfectly. When I walked into Leo's office, the air was different than before. The tension wasn't frantic anymore. It was heavy settled like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Leo was sitting at his desk flanked by a man I hadn't met. He introduced him as Detective Miller, a forensic investigator who specialized in corporate fraud and asset recovery. Miller didn't look like a TV detective. He looked like an accountant who had seen too much darkness. He wore a gray suit that had seen better days and had the tired eyes of a man who dealt in lies for a living. On the desk between them sat 3 thick manila folders. Mr. Caldwell Miller said, his voice gravelly and efficient. "We have completed the preliminary surveillance and the financial deep dive. I am going to be honest with you. It is ugly." I sat down, gripping the arms of the chair. "Just tell me," I said. "Don't sugarcoat it. Is it drugs? Is it gambling?" Miller shook his head. "It is worse. It is the appearance of success." He opened the first folder and slid a series of high-resolution photographs across the mahogany desk. They were time-stamped from the last 2 days. The first photo showed Brandon leaving his house at 7:30 in the morning. He was wearing his expensive navy suit, carrying his leather briefcase, looking every inch the successful logistics manager he claimed to be. He kissed Tiffany goodbye in the driveway. It looked like the perfect American morning. The next photo showed Brandon's car 40 minutes later. He wasn't at a logistics firm. He was parked in the back lot of a strip mall in a rundown part of Cicero. The third photo showed him entering a place called the Broken Spoke. It was a dive bar. "He goes there every day," Miller explained. "He arrives at 8:15. He sits in a booth in the back. He orders cheap beer and stares at his laptop until 5 o'clock. Then he drives home and tells his wife about his day at the office." I stared at the grainy image of my son slumped over a table in a dark bar, looking defeated and small. "He doesn't have a job," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He was fired 8 months ago," Miller said. "Performance issues and chronic absenteeism." He didn't tell his wife. He kept pretending. He kept spending. He cashed out his 401k to keep up the charade, but that money ran out 3 months ago. I felt a wave of nausea. 8 months. He had been lying to everyone for 8 months. That explained the desperation. That explained why $50,000 for my heart surgery was impossible for him. He didn't have it. He was drowning and trying to hide the water level. Miller opened the second folder. "This is the financial breakdown for Tiffany." He laid out credit card statements. They were a sea of red ink. American Express Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, all maxed out. "Tiffany owes $92,000 in revolving credit card debt," Miller stated flatly. "Nordstrom luxury spas, trips to Cabo designer handbags. She is spending like a millionaire on a household income of 0. They are shuffling balance transfers every month just to make the minimum payments. They are insolvent, Mr. Caldwell. Technically, they are bankrupt. They just haven't filed the paperwork yet." $92,000. I looked at the numbers, dizzy. They were living a lie. A beautiful, curated, Instagram-ready lie. And they needed me to fund it. "But that doesn't explain the restaurant," I said, trying to connect the dots. "If they are broke, if they have 0 credit, how did they get a lease for a downtown location?" Brandon said he needed $500,000 to close the deal. But he said he already put down a deposit. Leo leaned forward then. "This is the part that is going to hurt Tom." Miller opened the third folder. It contained a copy of a commercial lease agreement and a promissory note. "They did put down a deposit," Miller said. $50,000. $50,000, the exact amount I needed for my surgery, the exact amount they couldn't spare. "Where did they get $50,000 if they are broke?" I asked. "They went to a private lender," Miller said, "a hard money lender. In the industry we call them loan sharks, but they operate under the guise of venture capital. The company is called QuickBridge Capital. They specialize in high-risk, high-interest short-term loans. They charge 20% monthly interest, and they don't use collection agencies. They use guys with baseball bats. I felt the blood drain from my face. My son had borrowed money from the mob. He borrowed $50,000 to secure the location for this velvet spoon fantasy, Miller continued. He told them he had a silent partner coming in with $500,000 by Friday to pay off the loan and fully capitalize the business. That is why the deadline is Friday. If he doesn't pay them back the principal plus the VIG by 5 p.m. tomorrow, he defaults. And these are not people you want to default on. So he needs my money to save his legs, I murmured. It gets worse, Leo said softly. Look at the collateral documents. I looked at the lease agreement Miller was pointing to. At the bottom of the page under the section for guarantor, there was a signature. It was my signature. Or rather, it was a very good forgery of my signature. And attached to it were copies of my bank statements, my retirement fund balance, and the deed to my house. They used your identity to secure the hard money loan, Miller said. They couldn't get a loan for a pack of gum with their credit scores. So Brandon forged your signature. He used your financial standing to guarantee the debt. He presented himself as your agent. He essentially stole your financial identity to borrow $50,000 from criminals. The room spun. My son hadn't just been selfish. He had committed a felony. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. He had put my home, my life savings, and my good name on the line as collateral for a loan from thugs. If he doesn't pay them back tomorrow, Leo said, his voice grim, they won't just come after him. They will come after you. They will put a lien on your house. They will sue you, or worse, they will show up at your door. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. The picture was complete now. The desperation, the anger, the smear campaign at the school. It all made sense. They were trying to frame me as incompetent, so that if I tried to deny the signature later, they could claim I signed it during a lucid moment, and then forgot. Or worse, they wanted to take conservatorship, so they could legally access the funds to pay off the loan shark before the deadline. They weren't opening a restaurant. They were trying to dig themselves out of a grave they had dug with designer shoes and lies. And they were willing to bury me to do it. The betrayal was so absolute, so total, that it went beyond pain. It felt like a physical blow. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I put through college, had sold me out for a lease deposit on a fantasy. So what do we do? I asked, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Do I call the police? You could, Leo said. This is clear fraud. He would go to prison for 5 to 10 years. I looked at the photo of Brandon in the bar. Prison. My son in a cage. Despite everything, the thought made me sick. Is there another way? I asked. A way to stop this without putting him in jail, but without giving him a single cent of my money. Leo looked at Miller. They exchanged a look. There is the nuclear option, Miller said. Tell me. You said the property is at 124 Main Street, correct? Miller asked. Yes. I ran a title search on that building this morning, Miller said. The current owner is a holding company that is liquidating assets. They are in bankruptcy proceedings. They accepted Brandon's deposit because they are desperate for cash, too. But they haven't countersigned the final lease yet, because they are waiting for the proof of funds. The deal isn't closed. The building is technically still on the market. I looked at Miller and then at Leo. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan so cold, so precise that it scared me a little. But then I remembered Mrs. Higgins at the school gate. I remembered the words, toxic energy. I remembered the $50,000 they denied me. How much is the building worth? I asked. The distressed sale price is $4.2 million, Miller said. But since they are in bankruptcy, they might take a cash offer for less. Maybe $3 million. Maybe less if you close in 24 hours. I have $4.2 million in the trust, I said. Leo's eyes widened. Tom, are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting? I want to buy the building, Leo, I said. I want to buy 124 Main Street. I want to buy it today. Cash. If you buy the building, Miller said, a slow smile spreading across his face, you become the landlord. You inherit the pending lease application. Exactly, I said. And as the landlord, I will have the right to review the tenant's application. I will have the right to verify the guarantor's signature. And I will have the right to reject the lease based on fraudulent documentation. And the deposit, Leo asked. I looked at the forged documents. If the applicant provides false information, the deposit is forfeited, I said. That is standard contract law, isn't it? It is, Leo said. So I buy the building. I become his landlord. I reject his lease. I keep the $50,000 he borrowed from the loan sharks. And then I reveal the truth. It was ruthless. It was devastating. It would leave Brandon and Tiffany facing the loan sharks with no money, no lease, and no restaurant. It would destroy them financially. But they had tried to destroy me physically and mentally. They had declared war. I was just finishing it. Do it, I said. Set up a shell company. Make the offer. I want to own that building by tomorrow morning. And set up a meeting for Friday. Tell Brandon I am ready to sign the papers. Tell him to meet us here. Leo looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. You are going to trap him. No, Leo, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. He trapped himself. I am just going to be the one to spring the latch. Leaving Leo's office, I sat in my car for a long time watching the Chicago wind whip trash down the gray street. I had the weapon I needed now. I had the knowledge. But knowing your enemy is only half the battle. To win, you have to bring them into the kill box. And to do that, I had to become exactly what they accused me of being. A weak, confused, lonely old man. It was time to put on the performance of my life. I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel. When I walked into my empty house, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the kitchen, the scene of the crime from Sunday, and stared at the phone. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the last few days settle on me until I felt sufficiently heavy. Then I dialed Brandon. He answered on the first ring. He must have been staring at his phone, watching the hours tick down to the loan shark's deadline. Hello? His voice was sharp, defensive. Brandon, I said. I made my voice tremble just a little. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to sound defeated. It is Dad. There was a pause. Then a sigh. What do you want, Dad? Did you call to insult us again? No, I said softly. I called because the house is very quiet. I let that hang there. The universal code for I surrender. I have been thinking about what you said. I continued, slowing my speech, adding a touch of hesitation. About the hospital. About the money. Maybe you were right. Maybe I was remembering things wrong. You know how the anesthesia is. Sometimes I get confused lately. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. The tension in his voice evaporated instantly, replaced by a smooth, predatory warmth. It happens, Dad. We tried to tell you. You were under a lot of stress. We never said those things about the Tesla. We love you. Right, I said, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. We are family. And family helps each other. Look, I don't want to fight anymore. I miss Noah. I can't stand the thought of not seeing him grow up. We don't want that either, Dad, Brandon said quickly. We just want what is best for everyone. Bring him over, I said. Tonight. Bring Tiffany. I want to hear about the restaurant again. I want to look at the numbers with a fresh pair of eyes. If this is really a good opportunity, maybe I was too hasty. You want to discuss the investment? Brandon asked, the greed leaking into his tone like oil. Yes, I lied. Come for dinner. I will order pizza. No, Brandon practically shouted. No pizza. We will cook. Tiffany will make her lasagna. We will be there in an hour. We are coming home, Dad. He hung up. I put the phone down and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for days. The trap was set. They weren't coming for dinner. They were coming for the check. 55 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room window. I watched from behind the curtain as they parked. They didn't slam the doors this time. They didn't stomp. They practically floated up the walkway. Tiffany was carrying grocery bags from Whole Foods. Brandon was carrying a bottle of wine. And between them, holding their hands, was Noah. I opened the door before they could knock. Grandpa Noah screamed, breaking free from his mother's grip and launching himself at my legs. I caught him burying my face in his hair, smelling the shampoo and the cold winter air. For a second, the act dropped. This was real. This was the only pure thing left in my world. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, hugging him tight. "I missed you." "We missed you too," Tiffany cooed. She was standing in the doorway, beaming. She was wearing a soft pink sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like the cover of a parenting magazine. It was a terrifying transformation from the banshee who had screamed at me 3 days ago. Come in," I said, ushering them out of the cold. They entered the house like conquering heroes. Tiffany went straight to the kitchen and started unpacking groceries. Brandon clapped me on the shoulder, a firm, manly grip. "You look good, Dad," he said. "You look rested." "I feel better." I lied. Cleared my head. I watched them move through my house. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Tiffany, who hadn't cooked a meal in this house in 5 years, was suddenly chopping onions and humming. She tied an apron around her waist, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law to perfection. Brandon poured 3 glasses of wine. He handed me one, the expensive crystal clinking softly. "To family," he said, raising his glass, "and to new beginnings." "To family," I echoed, taking a sip. The wine tasted like vinegar, but I smiled. We sat in the living room while the lasagna baked. Noah sat on the floor playing with the Legos I kept in the corner. Brandon sat next to me on the sofa. He didn't just sit. He encroached. He put his arm along the back of the sofa behind my head. Then he started massaging my shoulders. "You are tense, Dad," he said, digging his thumbs into my trapezius. "You carry so much stress. You need to relax. That is why this partnership is going to be so good. We will do the heavy lifting. You just enjoy the returns." His hands felt heavy, invasive. I wanted to shrug him off. I wanted to tell him I knew he was a fraud who spent his days in a dive bar. But I forced myself to lean back. I forced my muscles to slacken. "Maybe you are right," I murmured. "I am getting too old to worry about money." "Exactly," Tiffany called out from the kitchen. "You should be spending your golden years traveling Tom, not worrying about bank accounts. Let Brandon handle the legacy." I looked at Brandon. "Okay," I said. "Tell me again. Where is this place? I want to make sure it is a solid location." Brandon stopped massaging and leaned forward, his eyes bright. "It is incredible, Dad. 124 Main Street, right in the heart of the downtown district. Corner lot. Huge windows. High foot traffic from the theater district. 124 Main Street." I repeated, locking the address into my mind. "And the landlord? You said it was a limited time offer." Brandon nodded vigorously. "Yeah, the owner is this big holding company, but they are having some liquidity issues. They are desperate to lease it out, to get cash flow. That is why they are asking for such a big deposit up front, but the monthly rent is a steal. We have to lock it in by Friday or they put it back on the market." I nodded slowly, pretending to digest this. "And you have the paperwork?" "Everything is ready," Brandon said. "We just need the certified check to sign the lease." I took a deep breath. "Okay, I will do it." Brandon and Tiffany exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the look of hunters who just watched the wolf step into the snare. "Really, Dad?" Brandon asked, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Yes," I said. "But I want to do it right. I want to do it legally. I don't want to write a personal check at the kitchen table." "Of course, whatever you want," Tiffany said, walking into the room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Call Leo tomorrow," I said. "Set up a meeting at his office for Friday morning, noon. I will have him draw up a formal investment agreement. You bring the lease papers. I will bring the check." "Friday is perfect," Brandon said. "That is the deadline. We can go straight from the lawyer to the landlord." The oven timer dinged. "Dinner is ready," Tiffany announced. We sat around the table and ate lasagna. It was actually good, which somehow made it worse. We laughed. We talked about Noah's school. Brandon told stories about his job at the logistics firm, inventing details about clients and shipments with the ease of a pathological liar. I watched him marveling at his performance. If he put this much effort into actual work, he would be a CEO by now. I played my part too. I asked questions. I laughed at the right moments. I let Noah sit on my lap and feed me garlic bread. I soaked up the warmth of my grandson, storing it away for the cold days ahead. When they finally left, hugging me and promising to see me on Friday, the silence returned to the house. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was charged with anticipation. I locked the door and immediately went to my study. I didn't go to sleep. I dialed Leo's private number again. "It is 124 Main Street," I said. "Got it," Leo said. He sounded wide awake. "I will call Miller. We will start the purchase process tonight. The shell company is ready. Make sure the seller knows it is a cash offer," I said. "No contingencies. Quick close. I want the title in my hand before Friday noon. Consider it done, Tom." I hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where my son's car had disappeared. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated the old man one last time. They were going to spend the next 3 days celebrating spending money they didn't have, dreaming of a rescue that wasn't coming. I touched the scar on my chest one last time. "See you Friday, son," I whispered to the darkness. "Don't be late." The lasagna dinner had served its purpose perfectly, because in his eagerness to sell me the dream, Brandon had given me the map to his own destruction. I sat in my study the next morning with a cup of coffee that finally tasted good again, replaying the conversation in my head. Midway through the meal, somewhere between the garlic bread and the third glass of wine, Brandon had leaned back in his chair and gestured with his fork. He was intoxicated by the idea of his own success, high on the prospect of the money he thought he had secured. "Dad, you have to see the architecture he had," said, his eyes gleaming. "It is historic. 124 Main Street. The brickwork alone is worth a fortune." I had nodded, sipping my water, asking casually about the current owner. "Oh, they are a mess," Brandon had laughed. "It is some investment group out of New York. They overextended on commercial real estate, and now they are liquidating. They are bleeding cash, Dad. That is why they are so eager to sign the lease. They need the deposit to pay their own creditors. They are desperate." Desperate. That was the key word. Desperate people make quick decisions. Desperate people take cash over promises. Brandon thought their desperation was his advantage, but he forgot that there is always a bigger fish in the pond. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was on the phone with Leo Katz. I didn't need to look up the number for the building's management company, because Miller, the private investigator, had already sent me the full dossier on the property at midnight. "Leo, I want you to make an offer," I said. "Tom, are you sure about this, Leo asked. His voice was thick with sleep, but sharpening quickly. "This is a lot of liquidity to move in one day." "I am sure," I said. "The building is listed at $4.2 million. Offer them $3.8 cash. No financing contingencies. No inspection period." We close in 24 hours. Leo whistled low. 3.8 cash with a 24-hour close. They would be insane to say no if they are in bankruptcy proceedings. But Tom, do you have that kind of liquidity available immediately? I do, I said, looking at the safe in the corner of my study. When I sold my logistics company 5 years ago, everyone thought I walked away with a few million. I let them think that. I let Brandon believe my net worth was maybe 2 million tied up in bonds. I never told them about the private sale of the proprietary software I developed. I never told them about the $4.2 million sitting in a high-yield trust fund that I nicknamed the Doomsday Fund. Well, Doomsday is here, I thought. Move the money, Leo, I said, but listen to me carefully. My name cannot appear on any of the paperwork. Not yet. Use the shell company we set up for the estate planning. North Shore Holdings, LLC. I want the deed in the name of the LLC. I understand, Leo said. If Brandon sees your name on the title search, he will run. Exactly, I said. I want to be the invisible hand. The next 6 hours were a blur of wire transfers and digital signatures. I sat in my home office surrounded by screens, feeling like a general commanding troops from a bunker. Miller reported that the sellers were ecstatic. They had been terrified of foreclosure. A cash buyer appearing out of nowhere was a miracle to them. They didn't care who North Shore Holdings was. They just cared that the check cleared. By 2 p.m., Leo called me back. We have a verbal agreement, Tom, he said. They accepted the $3.8 million. The electronic deed transfer is initiated. We are just waiting for the county recorder to update the file. As of tomorrow morning, you will legally own 124 Main Street. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction settle in my chest. And the lease, Leo, I asked. What about the lease Brandon thinks he is securing? That is the beauty of it, Leo explained. Since the previous owners hadn't countersigned the lease yet because they were waiting for Brandon's proof of funds, the application transfers to the new owner. That means you. You inherit the application. You inherit the $50,000 deposit currently held in escrow, and you have the sole discretion to approve or deny the tenancy. I leaned back in my chair. So I am his landlord. You are his landlord, Leo confirmed, and since he submitted fraudulent financial documents to secure the lease application, stating income he doesn't have and backing it with assets that aren't his, you have grounds to not only deny the lease but to claim damages. I looked out the window at the snow falling on my driveway. My son had spent the last 48 hours celebrating. He was probably at the Porsche dealership right now picking out a color for the car he was going to lease with my money. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had just shifted. He had no idea that the building he was dreaming about, the stage for his great success, now belonged to the man he called toxic. I felt a strange mixture of power and sadness. I had the power to crush him. I had the power to save myself. But I had to buy a building to do it. I had to spend nearly $4 million to stop my own child from robbing me. It was an expensive lesson, but it was necessary. Keep the closing documents sealed, Leo, I said. Bring everything to the meeting on Friday. I want the deed in a separate folder. You got it, Tom, Leo said. And Tom, yeah, you are doing the right thing. I know, I said, but it doesn't feel like a victory yet. I hung up the phone. I was now the owner of a prime piece of downtown real estate. I was a property magnate, and on Friday at noon, I was going to introduce myself to my new tenant. I walked over to the calendar on the wall and circled Friday in red marker. It wasn't just a deadline anymore. It was Judgment Day. The trap wasn't just set. It was welded shut. Brandon was walking into a room thinking he was getting a check, but he was walking into an eviction. Thursday passed with the agonizing slowness of a held breath. The deed to 124 Main Street was securely locked in Leo's safe, the ink on the transfer documents barely dry. Now I had to reel the line in. I picked up the phone at 10 in the morning and dialed Brandon. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with an anxiety he tried to mask with casual confidence. I told him simply that I had spoken to Leo, that the papers were drawn up, and that we would meet at the firm's office on Friday at noon to finalize the support agreement. I made sure to use the word support. It was a soft word, a fatherly word. It implied a gift, a safety net. Brandon practically wept with relief. He told me I was saving the family legacy. He told me I was the grandfather Noah deserved. I listened to his effusive praise, knowing that every word was a lie, calculated to extract a check. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilt. I felt the cold precision of a surgeon preparing to cut. I sat in my study for the rest of the day, but I wasn't idle. I was watching. Miller, the forensic investigator, had earned every penny of his retainer. He had set up a secure portal on my laptop where I could see the real-time updates from the surveillance on my son and daughter-in-law. If I had any lingering doubts, any shred of paternal hesitation about what I was about to do, the next few hours obliterated them completely. Miller had managed to mirror their cloud accounts. I wasn't just guessing what they were doing. I was reading their minds. At 2 in the afternoon, a text thread popped up on my screen. It was from Brandon to a contact listed only as S. I knew from Miller's report that S stood for Sharky the Enforcer, for the hard money lender. The text read simply, "The old man caved. He bit the hook. Full payment coming Friday afternoon. Call off the dogs." I stared at the words. The old man caved. He bit the hook. That was how my son spoke of me to criminals. I wasn't his father saving him from ruin. I was a mark. I was a fish to be caught gutted and filleted. He wasn't relieved that I was helping him. He was triumphant that he had outsmarted me. The disrespect was so visceral it made my teeth ache. But the show wasn't over. An hour later, a notification popped up from Tiffany's account. It was a geolocation tag. She wasn't at home taking care of Noah. She wasn't preparing for the supposed restaurant launch. She was at Neiman Marcus on Michigan Avenue. Miller's team sent photos a few minutes later. There she was, my daughter-in-law, strolling through the high-end department store with the confidence of a woman who had just won the lottery. She was looking at dresses. Not just any dresses, but evening gowns. Designer pieces that cost more than my first car. I watched the live feed of her credit card transactions. A charge hit her Amex for $5,200. It was declined. I leaned forward, watching the screen. What would she do? Would she walk away in shame? Would she realize the insanity of spending $5,000 on a dress when they were facing eviction and violence? No. A minute later, another charge appeared. This one went through. She had used a different card, one Miller had flagged as a high-interest emergency line of credit, the kind with 25% interest rates that desperate people use to buy groceries, not couture. She had maxed out her absolute last lifeline to buy a dress to wear to the meeting where she planned to rob me. Later, she posted a selfie on Instagram from the dressing room. She was wearing the dress, a shimmering silver thing that looked ridiculous on a Tuesday afternoon. The caption read, "Boss moves only. Big things coming this Friday. Manifesting abundance. Empire building. Success. Manifesting abundance." She wasn't manifesting anything. She was stealing my retirement. She was spending money she didn't have, money she assumed was already hers, because she believed I was too stupid to stop her. I turned off the screen. I didn't need to see anymore. The image of Tiffany preening in the mirror and Brandon bragging to loan sharks burned into my retinas. They were celebrating their own execution. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by their own greed and arrogance. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray Chicago skyline. Tomorrow at noon, I wasn't going to push them. I was just going to take off the blindfold and let them look down. I went to bed early that night, sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the just. I needed my rest. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. The mahogany grandfather clock in Leo Katz's office chimed 12 times, each note hanging in the air like a sentence being read. My charcoal suit felt like armor as I watched the double doors swing open. Brandon and Tiffany made their entrance, a vision of curated success that I knew was as hollow as a chocolate Easter bunny. Brandon strode in wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, radiating a manic confidence. Tiffany was right beside him, in that shimmering silver dress, clutching a designer bag that likely held nothing but maxed-out credit cards and a tube of lipstick. "Hey, Dad." Brandon's voice boomed too loud for the quiet dignity of the law office. He rushed over to shake my hand, his grip sweaty and desperate. "Good to see you, Leo. Beautiful day for business, isn't it?" "It is certainly a day for business," Leo replied, his face a perfect mask of professional detachment. He gestured to the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. "Please sit." They sat. Tiffany arranged her silver skirt, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We are so excited, Tom. Noah sends his love. He wanted to come, but school." I nodded, saying nothing. I just watched them. I watched the way Tiffany's eyes darted around the room, assessing the value of the art on the walls. I watched Brandon's leg bounce nervously under the table. They looked like people who had already spent the money they came to collect. "Let's get started," Brandon said, rubbing his hands together. "We have a 1 o'clock appointment with the building management to hand over the funds. We don't want to keep them waiting." "Of course," Leo said. "We value punctuality." Leo placed his hand on a slim black leather folder in the center of his desk. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of Brandon. Brandon didn't hesitate. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold fountain pen, and uncapped it with a flourish. He didn't even open the folder. He just poised the pen over the cover, ready to sign his name on whatever lay inside. "Where do I sign?" he asked, grinning at me. "Just show me the line, Leo. We trust you." Leo reached out and placed his hand firmly on top of the folder, stopping Brandon's movement. "Hold on, Brandon," Leo said, his voice dropping an octave. "In this office, we read before we sign. Open it." Brandon's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He laughed nervously. "Come on, Leo. It is just the investment agreement, right? Standard stuff. Dad promised." "Open it," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a cold draft. Brandon looked at me, then at Leo. Slowly, he put the pen down. He flipped open the cover of the folder. He expected a check. He expected a partnership contract. Instead, he was looking at a spreadsheet. A forensic accounting spreadsheet, color-coded and itemized, printed on heavy bond paper. Brandon stared at it, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What is this? This isn't the check." "No," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my reading glasses. I put them on slowly, deliberately. "That is a statement of reality, son. Since you asked me to invest in your future, I had to look at your present." I picked up my own copy of the document and began to read aloud. "Item 1, I said, my voice steady. "American Express Platinum Card. Account ending in 4598. Current balance $42,300. Status 90 days past due. Minimum payment missed 3 months in a row." Tiffany gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She lunged forward as if to grab the paper, but Brandon was frozen, staring at the numbers in horror. "Item 2, I continued, ignoring her. "Chase Sapphire Reserve. Current balance $49,700. Status over limit." "What are you doing?" Tiffany shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "This is private. You invaded our privacy. This is illegal. You spied on us." "It is perfectly legal when you ask me to be a guarantor," Leo interjected smoothly. "Due diligence, Mrs. Caldwell." I kept reading, my voice a metronome of their destruction. Item 3, Porsche Financial Services. Lease arrears on a 2023 Macan. $12,000. Repossession order active as of yesterday. Brandon looked up at me, his eyes hollow. Dad, stop. Item 4, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Quick Bridge Capital. A hard money loan taken out last week. Principal amount $50,000. Interest rate 20% monthly. Collateral. My house. My signature. Forged. The silence that followed was absolute. The air seemed to leave the room. Brandon turned the color of old ash. Tiffany stopped screaming and froze. You forged my signature, Brandon, I said softly. You stole my identity to borrow money from sharks. Dad, Brandon stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. I was going to pay it back. Today, with the investment money. It was just a bridge loan. I didn't mean to steal, I was fixing it. Fixing it? I slammed my copy of the report down on the desk. You were digging a hole and throwing me in it to save yourself. You lied about your job. You lied about the restaurant. There is no velvet spoon, is there? It is just a desperate attempt to get cash to pay off the debts you racked up playing pretend. Tiffany stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. You hired someone to spy on us. You are sick, Tom. You are a sick, twisted old man. I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was crinkled and old. I unfolded it and flattened it on the desk next to the evidence of their fraud. It was a hospital billing statement from Mount Sinai. Do you know what this is? I asked, pointing to the circled figure at the bottom. They stared at it dumbly. This is the bill for my heart surgery 6 months ago, I said. $50,000. The copay that saved my life. I looked at Brandon. When I laid in that bed dying, I asked you for $50,000. I didn't ask for a luxury. I didn't ask for a bailout for bad decisions. I asked for my life. And you said no. You said it was too much. You said I was old. You chose a Tesla over my heartbeat. Brandon flinched as if I had hit him. Dad, that is not fair. It is exactly fair, I shouted, letting the anger finally flood the room. It is the only fair thing in this room. You said no to $50,000 to save me. Today you come here asking for $500,000 to save yourselves from your own greed and stupidity. I leaned forward, my face inches from his. You want $500,000? The answer is no. I needed $50,000 to live. You said no. Now you need $500,000 to stay out of jail and keep your knees intact. And guess what? I say no. Brandon stared at me for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. His face went through a kaleidoscope of expressions. Shock. Disbelief. Then finally a rage so pure and concentrated it looked like it hurt him physically. The mask of the dutiful son, the mask of the ambitious entrepreneur, they all disintegrated. What was left was a cornered animal with bared teeth. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany conference table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet office. The crystal water pitcher rattled on its tray. You old bastard! Brandon hissed, his voice trembling with fury. You tricked us. You lured us down here with promises of support just to humiliate us in front of a lawyer. You think this is funny? You think destroying my life is a game? I didn't flinch. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the hospital bill. I am not destroying your life, Brandon. You did that yourself when you signed a loan with criminals. I am just refusing to pay for the cleanup. I am your son, he screamed, leaning over the table, veins bulging in his neck. You owe me. You have millions sitting in the bank doing nothing while I struggle. That is financial abuse. It is my money, I said calmly. I earned it, I saved it, and I get to decide where it goes. Not for long, Brandon spat. He straightened up, adjusting his suit jacket with a jerk. A cold, ugly smile spread across his face. You think you are so smart, Dad. You think you have all the power because you have the checkbook. But you forgot one thing. You are 74 years old. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. If you don't sign that check right now, if you don't fix this mess you baited us into, I am walking out of here and going straight to family court. I have already laid the groundwork. I have the report from the preschool. I have statements from friends saying you have been acting erratic, aggressive, and paranoid. Tiffany perked up, sensing a shift in the wind. She wiped her eyes and nodded. We have documentation, Tom. We have proof you are unfit. I am going to file for emergency conservatorship, Brandon said, his voice dripping with venom. By Monday morning, I will have a judge declare you mentally incompetent. Dementia, senility, whatever label sticks. I will take power of attorney over every single account you have. I will put you in a home, Dad. Not a nice one. One of those state-funded warehouses where they sedate you at 4 PM so they don't have to deal with you. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I will take control of your money, your house, and your life. And I will use your own fortune to pay off my debts. So you have two choices. You can give me the $500,000 now as a partner, or I can take it all on Monday as your guardian. Which is it going to be? The room was silent. Leo looked at me, his pen hovering over his notepad, waiting for my signal. He knew the play. He knew what was coming. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had just threatened to imprison me in my own mind, to strip away my rights and dignity just to fund his lifestyle. Any last shred of guilt I had about what I was about to do evaporated. It turned to ash. I started to laugh. It started as a low chuckle in my chest and bubbled up until I was laughing out loud. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it filled the room. Brandon looked confused. He took a step back, unsettled. What is so funny? Do you think I am bluffing? Oh, I know you aren't bluffing, I said, wiping a tear from my eye. You are exactly the kind of man who would lock his father away to steal his wallet. But before you go running to the courthouse, Brandon, before you try to convince a judge that I am the one who has lost his grip on reality, there is something you need to handle first. I stopped laughing and fixed him with a stare that could cut glass. You need to worry about your lease. Brandon blinked. What, the lease? I repeated. For the Velvet Spoon, at 124 Main Street. You have a meeting with the landlord at 1 o'clock to sign the papers and hand over the rest of the money, don't you? Yeah. Brandon said, his eyes darting between me and Leo. So what, I am not going to make that meeting because you won't give me the money? Actually, I said, reaching down to the floor where I had placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio. That meeting is already happening. Right here. Right now. I lifted the portfolio and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud right on top of the evidence of their credit card debt. Brandon looked at the portfolio, then at me. I don't understand. I flipped the cover open. Inside was a single document, a property deed. It was stamped with the official seal of the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. The date stamp was from yesterday morning. I bought the building, Brandon, I said softly. He froze. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You... What I bought 124 Main Street, I said, enunciating every syllable. I bought it yesterday morning. I paid $3.8 million in cash. The previous owners were very happy to sell. I pointed to the line on the deed where the owner was listed. North Shore Holdings, LLC. That is my company, I said. I am the sole proprietor, which means as of 24 hours ago, I am your landlord. Tiffany let out a strangled gasp. She grabbed Brandon's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit fabric. That is impossible, Brandon stammered. You can't be the landlord. We have a deal with the management company. You had a pending application, Leo corrected him, speaking for the first time in minutes. And when a property changes hands, all pending applications transfer to the new owner for review. Mr. Caldwell has the sole discretion to approve or deny any tenancy. I watched the realization wash over Brandon. It started at his feet and moved up, draining the color from his face until he looked like a corpse. He slumped into his chair, his legs giving out. "You bought the building," he whispered. "I did," I said. "And as your landlord, I decided to review your application file this morning. It was very interesting reading." I pulled another document from the portfolio. It was the lease application Brandon had submitted to the previous owners. "You claimed a household income of $400,000, I said. "That is a lie." "You claimed assets of $2 million. "That is a lie." "And you submitted a guarantor agreement signed by Thomas Caldwell." I tapped the signature on the page. "That is a forgery," I said. Brandon put his head in his hands. "Under the terms of the standard commercial lease application," I continued, my voice relentless, providing false financial information is grounds for immediate rejection of the lease. I picked up a red stamp from Leo's desk. It was an old-fashioned rubber stamp, the kind that makes a loud noise. I pressed it into the ink pad and then slammed it down onto the lease application. Denied. The red letters stood out starkly against the white paper. "So here is the situation, son," I said, leaning back. "I am rejecting your lease application for fraud. There will be no restaurant. There will be no velvet spoon." "But—" "The deposit," Tiffany squeaked. Her voice was high and thin with terror. "We put down $50,000. We need that back. We need it back today to pay the investors." "Ah, yes, the investors," I said. "You mean the loan sharks." She flinched. I looked at Leo. "What does the contract say about the deposit in cases of fraud?" Leo adjusted his glasses and read from the document. "In the event that the applicant provides materially false or misleading information to secure the lease, the deposit shall be forfeited as liquidated damages to the landlord." "Forfeited," Brandon whispered. "That means I keep it," I translated. "You stole my identity to borrow $50,000 from criminals. You gave that money to a landlord to hold the space. Now I am the landlord, and because you lied, that money is mine." I paused, letting the symmetry of it sink in. $50,000, Brandon. The exact amount you told me was too much to save my life. Now it is the exact amount you have lost. It is funny how the universe works, isn't it? Brandon looked up. His eyes were red, wet, and terrified. "Dad, please. You don't understand. If I don't pay them back today, they will kill me. They said they would break my legs." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had just threatened to put me in a state home. "I guess you should have thought about that before you tried to rob your father," I said. I stood up. "The meeting is over. Leo will escort you out." "You can't do this," Tiffany screamed, lunging across the table. "You are a monster. I am a businessman," I said, turning my back on them. "And I just closed a very good deal. Now get out of my building." Tiffany's scream echoed off the walls of the law office, a piercing sound of pure entitlement being crushed by reality. She lunged across the table, her manicured claws reaching for the deed, as if tearing the paper would somehow undo the transaction. Leo's security guard, a burly man named Mike, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward and intercepted her with a gentle but firm block. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing hysterically, her designer dress bunching up around her legs. Brandon didn't scream. He was past screaming. He was staring at the red stamp on his application, the word "denied" burning into his retinas. He looked like a man who had just watched his parachute fail to open. I sat back down and laced my fingers together. I wasn't finished. The eviction was just the beginning. The financial judgment had to be absolute. "You seem upset about the deposit," I said, my voice cutting through Tiffany's sobs. "Let me explain exactly why you aren't getting it back. It is not just because I am angry. It is because you broke the law." I picked up the lease agreement again, Clause 14, Section B. I recited from memory. I had read it 20 times the night before. "Any material misrepresentation of financial status, assets, or income by the tenant shall constitute a breach of contract during the application phase. In such an event, the landlord reserves the right to terminate the application immediately and retain the security deposit as liquidated damages for time off market and administrative costs. I looked at Brandon. You lied about your income. You lied about your assets. You forged a guarantor. That is 3 strikes, son. The $50,000 is legally mine. Brandon looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Dad, you can't keep it. That money isn't mine. It belongs to Sharky. If I don't give it back to him by 5 o'clock, he's going to hurt me. He is going to hurt Tiffany. I felt a flicker of fear, but I tamped it down. This was the consequence of their actions. Then I suggest you sell that Porsche you haven't paid for, I said, coldly. Or maybe Tiffany can return that $5,000 dress she bought to rob me in. But you aren't getting the $50,000 from me. I leaned forward, making sure he heard every word. Do you want to know why I am keeping it, Brandon? It isn't because I need the money. It isn't even to punish you. It is because of the symmetry. I held up the hospital bill again. 6 months ago, I laid in a hospital bed with a failing heart. I needed $50,000 to live. Just $50,000. And you told me it was too much. You told me my life wasn't worth the price of a Tesla. You forced me to sell the one thing I loved, my Mustang, to buy a few more years of life. I dropped the bill onto the table next to the rejected lease. And now here we are. You need $50,000 to save your skin. You need it to buy your life back from the criminals you got in bed with. And just like you did to me, I am saying no. The $50,000 you lost today is the exact price of the surgery you denied me. That is not vengeance, son. That is karma. That is the universe balancing the books. Brandon put his head on the table and began to weep. It was a pathetic, broken sound. But we are not done, I said. Leo, please show them the future. Leo nodded and opened a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a thick, bound document with a blue cover. It looked heavy. It looked permanent. He placed it on the table just out of Brandon's reach. This, Leo said, his voice professional and detached, is Mr. Caldwell's new estate plan. It was finalized and notarized this morning. Brandon lifted his head. Tiffany stopped crying and looked at the document with a hungry, fearful intensity. Previous to today, Leo continued, Mr. Caldwell's will was a standard division of assets. You, Brandon, were the sole beneficiary. I saw the pain flash across Brandon's face. He knew what he had thrown away. However, Leo said, given recent events, specifically the attempt to defraud your father and the threat to file for a conservatorship based on false pretenses, that will has been revoked. Leo opened the blue folder. This is an irrevocable trust, Leo explained. As of this morning, all of Mr. Caldwell's liquid assets, his investment portfolios, and the property at 124 Main Street have been transferred into this trust. How much? Tiffany whispered. She couldn't help herself. Even in the face of ruin, she had to know the number. I answered her. $4.2 million, I said. The air left the room. Brandon's jaw dropped. Tiffany looked like she might faint. You have $4 million, Brandon choked out. You told us you had maybe 2. I lied, I said. Just like you lied to me for 8 months about your job. I kept a rainy day fund. And it poured today. Leo continued. The sole beneficiary of this trust is Noah Caldwell. Brandon blinked. Noah. Yes, Leo said. The funds are locked. They are to be used exclusively for Noah's education and health until he reaches the age of 30. At that time, the principal will be released to him. And us, Tiffany asked, her voice trembling. Leo turned the page. Section 4, paragraph 1. Leo read, Brandon Caldwell and Tiffany Caldwell are expressly disinherited. They shall receive no distribution from this trust, nor from the estate of Thomas Caldwell, for any reason whatsoever. Furthermore, this trust contains a no contest clause. If either of you attempts to challenge this trust, or if you attempt to challenge Mr. Caldwell's competency in court, the entire trust is voided, and the assets will be donated immediately to the American Heart Association. I watched the realization sink in. I had blocked every exit. If they sued me, they destroyed their son's future. If they tried to declare me insane, they destroyed their son's future. They were trapped. "You cut us out," Brandon whispered. "You cut us out completely." "You cut yourselves out," I said. "When you threatened to ban me from seeing my grandson, you proved that you cannot be trusted with his future. So I am securing it for him. He will go to college. He will have a start in life. But he won't get it through you. You will never touch a dime of my money again." I stood up. My knees felt steady. My heart was beating strong and slow. "The meeting is over," I said. "You have a deadline with your investors. I suggest you start making phone calls." Brandon stood up slowly. He looked like an old man. He looked at me, searching for some crack in the armor, some hint of the father who used to catch him when he fell. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "They are going to hurt me." I looked at him. I felt a pang of phantom pain, the ghost of the love I used to have. But then I looked at the forged signature on the lease. "I know," I said, "and I am sorry it came to this. But you are a grown man, Brandon. You made a deal. Now you have to pay the bill." I turned to Leo. "Walk them out." I turned my back on them and walked to the window. I heard the scuffle of chairs, the heavy footsteps, and the sound of the door closing. I didn't turn around. I looked out at the city below, at the cars moving like ants, at the gray sky that was finally starting to clear. I was alone in the office. But for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt clean. I had cauterized the wound. It hurt, God, it hurt, but the infection was gone. I had saved my life in the hospital, and today I had saved my dignity. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs without pain. The war was over. I had won. But as I watched a police cruiser drive by silently 20 stories down, I knew the fallout for them was just beginning, and I would watch it from a distance, safe in the fortress I had built. I watched from the window of Leo's high-rise office as my son and daughter-in-law exited the building 20 stories below. From this height, they looked like insects scuttling across the pavement, desperate and small. They didn't even make it to their car before the reality of their situation caught up with them. I saw Brandon pull his phone from his pocket and answer a call. Even from this distance, I could see his body posture collapse. It was 5 o'clock. The deadline had passed. Sharky the loan shark wasn't calling to negotiate, he was calling to collect. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I didn't need to see the panic attack or the screaming match that undoubtedly followed in the parking garage. I turned away from the window and thanked Leo. The legal war was over, but the fallout for them was just beginning. The collapse of Brandon and Tiffany's curated life was swift and brutal. It happened with the same speed as a controlled demolition. Without my money to act as a buffer against reality, the walls closed in on them within days. They couldn't pay the loan shark back. Miller told me later that they had to liquidate everything they owned within 48 hours just to keep their knees intact. They sold the jewelry. They sold the designer furniture. They sold the electronics. They even sold Tiffany's engagement ring, which I had paid for 5 years ago. It barely covered the principal and the exorbitant interest, but it kept them out of the hospital. But paying off the shark left them with nothing to pay the legitimate creditors. The repo man came for the Porsche the following Tuesday. It was a public spectacle in their driveway, the tow truck dragging the luxury SUV away while neighbors watched from behind curtains. Next came the eviction notice from their rental house. Without my monthly subsidies, they couldn't make rent. They were out on the street in 30 days. The marriage didn't survive the poverty. As soon as the money dried up, so did Tiffany's commitment. She filed for divorce less than 3 weeks after the meeting in Leo's office. She cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. She had married a lifestyle, not a man. When Brandon couldn't provide the lifestyle anymore, he became useless to her. She moved back in with her parents, taking nothing but her bitterness and a closet full of clothes she could no longer afford to dry clean. Brandon ended up exactly where he deserved to be. He moved into a studio apartment in a rundown complex near the airport, the kind of place where the hallways smell of stale cigarettes and regret. He got a job waiting tables at a diner not far from where he used to pretend to be a logistics executive. I saw him once from a distance when I drove by. He looked 10 years older. He was wiping down a table, his shoulders slumped, wearing a uniform that didn't fit. He looked humbled. He looked broken. I didn't stop. I didn't go in. I kept driving because sometimes the only way to help someone is to let them hit the bottom so hard they finally wake up. He had to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet, even if it meant standing on a cracked linoleum floor for minimum wage. As for me, I had business to finish. I owned a building I didn't want. 124. Main Street was a beautiful piece of architecture, but I had no interest in being a landlord. I put it back on the market the week after the confrontation. Because I had bought it cash during a distress sale, I had instant equity. I sold it 2 months later for $4.5 million, turning a tidy profit on my pain. I took the check directly to Mount Sinai Hospital. I walked into Dr. Evans's office, the same man who had looked at me with pity when I couldn't afford the CO pay. I placed the check on his desk. "This is for the cardiac care fund," I told him. "I want this money to establish a grant program. No patient should ever have to sell their car or beg their children for money to get a life-saving surgery. If Medicare won't cover it, this fund will." Dr. Evans looked at the amount and then at me. He had tears in his eyes. "Tom, this will save hundreds of lives." "It already saved one," I said, tapping my chest. "Mine." With the building sold and the trust fund locked down for Noah, my affairs were in order. I had cut the cancer out of my life. The toxicity, the manipulation, the constant drain on my spirit. It was all gone. My house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with peace. But there was one last thing I needed to do. One empty space I needed to fill. I went to a classic car auction in late spring. I walked through the rows of polished chrome and steel looking for a specific silhouette. And then I saw her. Lot number 42, a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. It wasn't the same color as my old one. My old one had been black. This one was red. Candy apple red. It gleamed under the lights, aggressive and beautiful, a symbol of American muscle and unrepentant power. I didn't hesitate. I didn't check my bank balance. I raised my paddle and I kept it raised until the hammer fell. I paid $85,000 for it. $35,000 more than I had sold my old one for. And I didn't care. It was worth every penny. The day I picked it up, the sky over Chicago was a brilliant, piercing blue. The lake was calm, reflecting the skyline like a mirror. I slid into the driver's seat, and the smell hit me instantly. Old leather gasoline and freedom. It was the smell of my youth. It was the smell of a life that belonged only to me. I turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the chassis and straight into my bones. It was a heartbeat. A mechanical, powerful heartbeat that synced perfectly with the one beating in my chest. I pulled out of the lot and headed for Lake Shore Drive. I rolled the windows down, letting the wind whip through the cabin. I pressed the accelerator and the car surged forward, responding instantly to my command. I wasn't an old man anymore. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a bank account to be drained. I was Tom Caldwell. I was a survivor. I drove north with the lake on my right, vast and endless. I thought about Brandon wiping tables. I thought about Tiffany living in her childhood bedroom. I thought about Noah, who would one day get a letter explaining that his grandfather loved him enough to protect his future from his own parents. I felt a phantom ache where the old Mustang used to be, but it was fading, replaced by the thrill of the red hood stretching out in front of me. I realized then that I hadn't just bought a car. I had bought back my dignity. I had bought back my agency. People say you can't put a price on family, but they are wrong. My son put a price on me. He decided I was worth less than a Tesla. And in doing so, he taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. He taught me that my life was worth fighting for. I shifted gears, the engine singing, as I accelerated past the city limits. The road ahead was open and clear. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I tapped the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the road. I smiled into the wind. $50,000, I whispered to the roar of the engine. That was the price. It cost me $50,000 to see the truth. It cost me $50,000 to realize that I was surrounded by wolves. It was a lot of money. It was a painful check to write. But as I watched the city fade in my rearview mirror, leaving the toxicity and the lies behind me, I knew one thing for certain. $50,000 to see through people's hearts, to buy my freedom, to save my life. It was the cheapest tuition I ever paid. 3 months after I bought the red Mustang, I sold the building at 124 Main Street. I didn't want to be a landlord, and I certainly didn't want a permanent monument to my son's betrayal in my portfolio. I sold it to a tech incubator for $4.5 million. Since I had bought it for $3.8 million cash during a distress sale, I cleared a profit of $700,000 in 90 days. It was just business. But to Brandon, it was the final insult. I heard through Leo that the news of the sale nearly broke him. He was living in a studio apartment in Cicero, working double shifts at a diner to pay for a divorce attorney who was losing patience. When he found out I had flipped his restaurant location for a near $1 million profit, he tried one last desperate Hail Mary. He didn't call. He didn't text. He showed up at the classic car show in Grant Park, where I was displaying the Boss 429. It was a Saturday in July. The sun was shining, the chrome was gleaming, and I was sitting in a folding chair next to my car, talking to a fellow enthusiast about carburetors. I saw a shadow fall over the hood of the Mustang. I looked up. It was Brandon. He looked terrible. He had lost 20 pounds. His hairline was receding, and he was wearing a suit that was clearly from his old life, but now it hung loosely on his frame, unpressed and stained at the cuff. He looked like a ghost of the arrogant man who had stormed into my kitchen in the winter. $700,000, Brandon said. His voice was raspy. I saw the public records, Dad. You made $700,000 on my idea. I stood up slowly. I didn't offer him a hand. It wasn't your idea, Brandon. It was a lease you tried to steal with forged documents. I just cleaned up the mess. It was my location, he shouted, drawing stares from the crowd. I found it. That profit belongs to me. It belongs to the family. The family doesn't exist anymore. I said, my voice low and hard. You dissolved it when you tried to have me committed. He stepped closer, invading my space. He smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I am drowning, Dad. Tiffany took everything in the settlement. I am sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I am 33 years old, and I am waiting tables. And you are sitting here with a vintage car and $700,000 in fresh profit. How do you sleep at night? I looked him in the eye. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, distant pity. I sleep very well, I said, because I don't owe money to criminals, and I don't lie to the people I love. I reached into my pocket. Brandon flinched, maybe expecting a check, maybe expecting a weapon. I pulled out a business card. It wasn't for a bank. It was for a trade school in the city that offered courses in welding and HVAC repair. You want money, I said, tucking the card into his jacket pocket. Learn a trade. Learn to work with your hands. It is honest work. It pays well. And nobody can fire you if you are good at it. That is the only inheritance you are getting from me advice. Brandon stared at the card. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and angry. I have an MBA, he spat. Heaves. You have a piece of paper, I corrected. And it hasn't done you much good. Start over, Brandon, from the bottom. It is the only way you will ever climb out. I turned my back on him and sat down. Security, I called out calmly to the event staff. Brandon fled before they arrived. I watched him go disappearing into the crowd of happy families. It was the last time I saw him face to face. I heard later that he moved to Arizona to start over. I hope he did. But I didn't check. I couldn't afford to care anymore. My focus shifted to the only Caldwell who still mattered, Noah. The no-contact order from Tiffany was still technically in effect, but money has a way of opening doors that anger tries to close. Tiffany was struggling. The divorce had left her with custody, but no alimony as Brandon had no income. She was working as a receptionist at a gym, barely making ends meet. I knew she wouldn't be able to afford private school for Noah. He was heading for the overcrowded public system. I called Leo. Set up a meeting with the headmaster of St. Jude's Academy, I said. I want to endow a scholarship. A scholarship? Leo asked. The Noah Caldwell Scholarship, I said. It pays full tuition, books, and uniforms for one student selected by the donor. I want the school to approach Tiffany. Tell her Noah has been selected for a merit-based anonymous grant. She won't say no to free private school. It feeds her ego. And the condition? Leo asked. The condition is that the donor gets copies of the report cards and gets to attend one school function a year anonymously from the back of the room. It worked. Tiffany accepted the grant without asking questions. She was too relieved to have one less bill to pay. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of the St. Jude's auditorium for the winter pageant. The lights were dim. I saw Noah on stage. He was wearing a cardboard snowflake costume, singing off-key. He looked happy. He looked healthy. I didn't wave. I didn't try to talk to him. I just watched him. I knew that my money was buying him an education, buying him a safe environment, buying him a future that his parents couldn't provide. I was protecting him from the shadows. It wasn't the relationship I wanted, but it was the one he needed. I was his guardian angel, and angels don't need credit. They just need to know their charges are safe. But the true payoff of that $50,000 came a year later. I was at Mount Sinai for my annual checkup. Dr. Evans walked into the exam room grinning. Tom, he said, I want you to meet someone. He led me down the hall to the cardiac rehab center. There was a young man there, maybe 30 years old, walking on a treadmill. He looked weak, but he was moving. His wife was sitting nearby, holding a newborn baby. That is Michael, Dr. Evans said. He is a construction worker, no insurance. He came in with a ruptured valve last week. He needed the TAVR procedure to survive, but he didn't have the copay. The hospital was getting ready to transfer him to the county facility, where he probably would have died waiting. Dr. Evans looked at me. We used the grant, Tom, the cardiac care fund you started with the building money. We paid for his device. We saved him. Michael saw Dr. Evans and stepped off the treadmill. He didn't know who I was. He just saw an old man standing next to his doctor. Thank you, Doc, Michael said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I am going to make it home for my daughter's first birthday. I looked at the baby girl sleeping in her mother's arms. I looked at the young father who had been given a second chance. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with blood flow. My son had tried to steal $50,000 from me to pay a loan shark. I had taken that money, multiplied it, and used it to buy a father for that little girl. I had turned a betrayal into a life. I walked out of the hospital into the crisp Chicago air. My Mustang was parked in the lot, a splash of defiant red against the gray asphalt. I got in and turned the key. The engine roared. I was 76 years old. I had no wife, no son to call my own, and a grandson I could only love from a distance. By most standards, I was a lonely man. But as I pulled onto the highway merging into traffic, with the confidence of a man who has nothing left to fear, I realized the truth. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I had cut out the rot. I had saved the future. And I had kept my heart beating on my own terms. The $50,000. It wasn't a loss. It was the best investment I ever made. It bought me the truth. And the truth, as cold and hard as it was, had set me free. I shifted into fourth gear and drove toward the horizon, leaving the city and the ghosts of my family in the rearview mirror. We are often taught that family is everything, that a parent should set themselves on fire just to keep their children warm. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the fire just consumes you, and they will stand back and watch you burn without offering a drop of water. My son taught me that love has limits, but dignity does not. Losing $50,000 was painful, but living a lie would have cost me my soul. If you are holding on to toxic people simply because you share a last name, let go. The peace you find on the other side is worth every single penny. If you believe I did the right thing by choosing my life over my son's greed, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.